we are once again speaking of the Prevention of Terrorism Act, because once again a government has come to power, promising the repeal of the PTA, and after coming to power, they are shielding themselves, are using the Prevention of Terrorism Act as a shield, protecting themselves from people and legitimate people's demands. There are two aspects which I want to specifically mention, which has been eroding our democracy, eroding our political power, or democratic nature of our political power. One is the executive presidential system, and the other is the Prevention of Terrorism Act. And not very surprisingly, both these systems came together in the late 1970s with the J.R. Jayawardena government. When J.R. Jayawardena took over power, he pushed a socialist economy into a neoliberal open market economy. This was happening around the world, with neoliberalism being the ideology which was being pushed across countries at that time. And they needed repressive laws to crush opposition and dissent from people who were concerned about the welfare of the entire state. So therefore, they passed the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Even at the time when it was passed, members of the parliament raised serious concerns, asking why such a draconian piece of legislation, which is going to immerse the country in a permanent state of emergency and a permanent state of darkness, is being passed. But since the J.R. Jayawardena government had ample majority to pass through any legislation, this was rushed through Parliament as an urgent bill. At the time when the Prevention of Terrorism Act was passed, there were few other laws parallel to that kind of fast-sweeping legislation. So therefore, the International Commission of Juries put out a report saying, comparing the Prevention of Terrorism Act to the apartheid laws of South Africa. So we can imagine how bad the law was. And thereafter, we saw how bad and abusive the law can be when it comes into operation. People were arrested under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, disappeared under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, tortured under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, simply because the law allows for indefinite detention, the law allows for confessions to be admissible, thereby indirectly encouraging torture during interrogation processes. So this is the inherent nature of the Prevention of Terrorism Act. So it was very strange indeed to hear the NPP government, which at one time the constituent party in the NPP, the JVP, were the targets of the Prevention of Terrorism Act, now coming and telling people the problem with the Prevention of Terrorism Act is not the act itself, but the fact that it was used abusively. I often remind people of the history of the Prevention of Terrorism Act, because we have to keep speaking about this to understand the very nature of the act. During the Civil War, the Tamil community, I am a member of the Tamil community, we were profiled and targeted under the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Several Tamil youths were arrested, detained, tortured, and even killed and disappeared under the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Then came the Easter Sunday attacks. The Easter Sunday attack, we all know, at that time also we knew, now also we know, is a fault of the fact that the state did not want to take protections, or state did not take state security seriously, or state security was compromised for certain political agendas. But soon after the Easter Sunday bombings happened, there was a scapegoat, and they scapegoated the entire Muslim community. Within weeks, 2,000 Muslims were arrested, including my friend and fellow activist Dilshan Mohammed, who was warning the state long before the Easter Sunday attack with names of these subsequent suicide bombers, that these persons were a threat to national security. And instead of calling him and using him and asking him and seeking his assistance to prevent the Easter Sunday bombings, instead of doing that, after the Easter Sunday bombings, they conveniently came and arrested him under the Prevention of Terrorism Act. So this is how the state security operates in order to protect certain elements inside the state security structures and apparatus, and further victimizing those who are able to actually protect people in this country, who are actually able to protect and ensure that people are protected from violent acts committed by individuals. We also know that soon after the Aragala, the student union, the Inter-Union Student Federation leaders were targeted. They were put under the Prevention of Terrorism Act. And thankfully, a magistrate decided to step up. It was a historical judgment. He stepped up and he said there was no evidence against Vasantha Mudalige, and he completely discharged Vasantha Mudalige from the case. This was the first time since the PTA was in operation that a magistrate has discharged a suspect from all charges in a PTA case. And it took nearly 30 years for us to come there. So we come in full circles again. In 2017, the Yapalne government once again promised to repeal the PTA. And instead of repealing the PTA, what they did was they produced another draft, a more draconian piece of legislation, unfortunately with the same people who were campaigning for the repeal of the PTA. So they produced the draft which was more draconian than the PTA, because here there were provisions to produce secret reports during trials. There were provisions to make even civil action acts of terror. And of course, we opposed it even at that time. Then even during the last government, there was a similar piece of legislation introduced. So we keep speaking about the Prevention of Terrorism Act repeatedly and reminding people there is no need for an anti-terror law. Do not allow states and governments to scare you into believing that we need anti-terror laws to protect us from violent actions by certain individuals. We have ample provisions in the penal code. In times of emergency, we also have the emergency regulations and the emergency provisions. So we have ample laws under ordinary laws of the country which can protect people from security threats or from violent acts. But at the same time, these laws also ensure that the nature of the state, the democratic nature of the state, is preserved and not threatened. I want to say one last thing. Today I saw a video clip of Julian Assange making a statement saying that the CIA, it's on public record, that the CIA has planned an assassination while he was taking refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy. And he called it a transnational or a extraterritorial repression by state security apparatus. This is what happens when we allow governments, when we allow states to fearmonger us into granting them excessive powers, which will end up abusing, which will end up putting people's lives and security at risk, and we do not even know what is happening, because it is all happening secretly under the guise and pretext of state security. So in regards to the Aragambe threat, we still don't know what the state security threat is. The NPP government, which promised the repeal of the PTA, has once again started using the PTA. Now they are hiding behind the parliament and saying until the parliament comes into operation, we can't repeal the PTA. We all know that until parliament comes into operation, we can't repeal the PTA. But we are all asking the NPP government what is preventing them from taking a moral and a moral political stance against or for the repeal of the PTA, which they are not doing. So we ask the people, pressure the government, pressure the president to repeal the PTA, to also abolish the executive president, but also to repeal the PTA. And I as a lawyer and as an executive member of the People's Struggle Alliance responsibly state, we do not need anti-terror laws in this country in order to protect people from security issue, protect people from being subjected to violent acts by individuals.
විපක්ෂය වෙනස් කරන
எதிர்க்கட்சியினை மாற்றியமைப்போம்.
Change the opposition. ජන අරගල සන්ධානය
மக்கள் போராட்ட முன்னணி
People's Struggle Alliance